I've lived long enough to learn a few things about life, but the hardest lesson didn't come from the streets, from business, or from enemies. It came from someone I raised with my own hands. My name is Elias, and if there's one truth I've gathered over the years, it's this. The higher you climb, the thinner the air gets, and people you love most can sometimes forget how they even got oxygen. For 30 years, I worked, sacrificed, and built a future brick by brick. But in just 48 hours, everything vanished. My company gone. My savings drained. My so-called friends scattered like loose papers in the wind. But losing all of that wasn't the part that broke me. The real blow came when I knocked on my own son's door. I only wanted a place to sleep for the night. One night. Just until I figured out what direction my life was supposed to go after losing everything. Julian opened the door, looked at me, and, just like that, closed it again. No shame. No hesitation. No second glance. I stood there in the cold, listening to the quiet thud of that door. And that moment carved a mark into me deeper than any financial loss ever could. Before you scroll away, think carefully. If a father who has given everything can be thrown out this easily, how safe do you think any of us are? If you believe no parent deserves rejection, subscribe now. Don't wait until life teaches you this lesson personally. And if you still refuse, go to the comments and explain why a man should be left out in the cold after dedicating his life to his family. When Julian shut that door, I didn't move right away. My hand was still halfway raised, as if my mind refused to accept what my eyes had just seen. A father shouldn't have to stand outside his own child's home like an unwanted visitor. I took a step back, staring at the house I once helped him pay for. The lights were warm inside, too warm for someone who could be that cold. Through the curtains, I saw shadows passing, voices laughing faintly, life continuing without even a flicker of concern for the man standing on their porch. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself to walk away. Not because I wanted to, because staying there any longer made my chest tighten with a kind of pain I wouldn't wish on anyone. The street felt longer than usual. Every step reminded me of birthdays I never missed, school fees I paid without complaining, late nights I spent working overtime just so he and his sister could go to college with pride. Funny how memory works. It shows you everything you did right, at the exact moment someone decides you never mattered. When I reached my car, I stood beside it for a moment. I couldn't bring myself to open the door yet. The quiet around me felt louder than any insult. It reminded me of something I once told my children. Family is supposed to be a shelter, not a storm. But that night, the storm came from the very people I once sheltered. I finally slid into the driver's seat, shut the door gently, and just sat there. Not driving. Not thinking clearly. Just breathing, slowly, as the weight of everything pressed down on me. The car wasn't comfortable anymore. It wasn't a vehicle. It felt like the last corner of the world that still tolerated me. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, trying to settle the sting behind them. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't self-pity. It was disbelief, raw, sharp, and humiliating. It's strange. You spend decades teaching your child kindness, responsibility, decency. You wipe their tears when they fall. You carry them when their tiny legs can't take another step. You sacrifice rest, dreams, and comfort to make sure they never go without. You keep telling yourself they'll remember. You keep trusting that love leaves a mark strong enough to survive adulthood. But that night taught me something different. Some people grow older, but they don't grow wiser. Some hearts stay shallow no matter how deeply you pour into them. I turned on the ignition for warmth, not to drive. The dashboard lights glowed softly, and for the first time in years, I felt old. Not in body. In spirit. That kind of exhaustion doesn't come from work or age. It comes from being pushed aside by someone who should have been your safe place. As the cold crept in through the windows, A question formed in my mind, quiet but painful. How did my own child become a stranger? I rested my hands on the steering wheel, staring out through the fogging windshield. The street was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the world had decided to step back and let me feel every bit of the blow I had taken. I kept hoping, foolishly, that maybe Julian would come running out. Maybe he'd open the door again with remorse in his eyes, call my name, tell me he made a mistake. But hope can be cruel. It makes you wait for people who have already decided you're not worth the walk to the driveway. Minutes passed. Then more. Nothing. The warmth from the heater filled the car, but my chest stayed cold. Not the kind of cold you feel on your skin. No, the kind that settles inside you when someone you love shows you just how replaceable you are in their life. I pulled my jacket tighter and watched the porch light turn off. That was the part that stung the most. Not the door closing. Not the silence. The light going off, as if my presence wasn't just unwelcome, it was inconvenient. At that moment, something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not revenge. Just clarity. A painful clarity that told me I had officially reached the part of life where a father must stand alone. But I didn't know that this long, lonely night was about to be the turning point of everything. If watching a father get shut out like this hits you even a little, subscribe now. Don't be the kind of person who looks away when someone is suffering. And if you still refuse to subscribe, then step into the comments and explain why leaving a parent alone in the dark doesn't bother you. I didn't drive far. Just a few blocks from Julian's house, I pulled over beside an empty park and turned off the engine. The silence that followed felt heavier than the night sky itself. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the faint glow of distant streetlights, wondering how my life had managed to collapse so completely. It's one thing to lose your business. It's another to lose your money. But losing the sense that you matter to your own child, that's a wound nothing prepares you for. I leaned my seat back a little, hoping to rest, but closing my eyes only made memories rush in faster. The years I spent grinding through double shifts. The celebrations I funded even when my body was begging for rest. The choices I made to ensure my children would live better than I did. Funny how the mind works. It doesn't replay the moments they failed you. It replays the moments you stood by them. I glanced at the passenger seat. An old coat lay there, the one I used to wear when I walked Julian to school at dawn. Seeing it now felt like looking at a relic from a life that no longer belonged to me. I pulled it over myself and settled into the uncomfortable angle of the seat. At my age, sleeping in a car isn't rest, it's punishment. But that night, I didn't have a choice. The world had pushed me out, and my own child had locked the last door I had hoped would stay open. The clouds shifted gradually, like they were gathering their strength before turning on me. A low rumble swept across the sky, and soon enough, the first drops tapped against the windshield. Soft at first, then steady, then relentless, exactly how life had felt these past few weeks. I pulled the coat tighter around my chest. A man my age isn't built for cold nights in a cramped car. Every joint complained, every breath felt heavier than the last. Still, I tried to rest my head against the window, hoping fatigue would take me quickly. It didn't. The rain grew louder, each drop a reminder that I had nowhere else to go. I watched the water slide down the glass, blurring the world outside into streaks of gray. Some folks call rain cleansing. To me, that night, it felt like the sky was joining in on the humiliation, like it wanted to make sure I understood just how far I'd fallen. My stomach growled, but I ignored it. I'd lost my appetite hours ago, somewhere between Julian's cold stare and the slam of his door. What haunted me most wasn't the rejection, it was how familiar it felt. Like I'd been walking toward this moment for years without noticing the signs. At one point, I reached into my pocket and pulled out an old photo. Julian, 6 years old, missing a tooth, arms wrapped around my neck. I held that picture for a long time. The rain kept falling. The night kept stretching. And I kept asking myself the same question over and over again. How does a father end up here? I placed the photo on the dashboard, letting it rest against the base of the windshield. The boy in that picture had once clung to my leg whenever I tried to leave for work. He used to cry if I came home late, terrified that something had happened to me. Funny how life flips itself over. Now I could disappear for days and he wouldn't even check. The rain softened for a moment, just enough for the car's engine clicks to become audible as it cooled. A lonely sound. A tired sound. It echoed how I felt inside. My thoughts drifted to the years I spent building everything he now takes for granted. The early mornings when I opened the shop before the sun even showed its face. The late nights when I counted the day's earnings by lamplight, praying it would be enough to cover school supplies, groceries, and whatever unexpected crisis life felt like throwing at me. I wasn't a perfect father. No one is. But I always showed up. Even when I had nothing left in the tank, I showed up. Now, sitting in that dark, cramped car, it struck me how loyalty isn't measured by what you receive. It's measured by what you give even when you're empty. A gust of wind shook the vehicle, making the frame tremble slightly. Maybe it was nature's way of telling me to wake up. To see things clearly for the first time in years. I took a slow breath, letting the cold air fill my lungs. For the first time that night, a quiet, painful truth settled in. Some wounds aren't caused by enemies. They're inflicted by the people you'd once have died for. My back stiffened the longer I sat there, and a sharp ache settled deep into my spine. Age has a way of reminding you that time isn't your ally. It's a weight you carry, one that grows heavier with each passing year. I shifted in the seat, trying to find a position that didn't hurt, but the car wasn't built for comfort. Not for someone like me, anyway. A gust of cold air slipped through the cracked window, brushing against my neck. It wasn't just the chill that made me shiver. It was the thought that this might be my new reality. Nights like this. Lonely. Uncertain. Forgotten. I placed my hands on the steering wheel, letting them rest there. The veins stood out more now. A reminder that I had spent a lifetime working with them, lifting, fixing, carrying. Those same hands once held Julian steady when he took his first steps. Now they trembled slightly, not from age, but from the weight of disappointment. A single car passed by, splashing water across the curb. It didn't slow down. Didn't notice me. Didn't care. It felt symbolic. No matter how much you give, life doesn't promise anyone a soft landing. I lowered my forehead to the back of my hand and closed my eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, but to hold myself together. Because there's a different kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from heartbreak, not from labor. In that moment, a thought crept in quietly, one I didn't want to admit. I was starting to feel invisible. The rain eventually eased into a soft drizzle, but the cold never left. My breath fogged the air, each exhale a reminder that I was still here, still fighting sleep, still trying to keep myself from giving in to the heaviness pushing down on me. I leaned back and stared through the windshield. The glass was fogged, streaked, and dirty, much like the way my life felt. For decades, I had been the man people relied on. The one who solved problems, built futures, provided stability. Now I couldn't even provide myself a warm place to rest my head. A lump formed in my throat as I remembered the look on Julian's face at the door. Not sadness, not conflict, but inconvenience. That was the part that broke me. I pressed the heel of my palm against my eyes, trying to stop the sting, but the tears forced their way through anyway. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet streams that ran down my cheeks and disappeared into my shirt collar. I whispered into the darkness, not expecting an answer. Where did I go wrong raising you, son? But the night offered nothing in return. just the humming of distant traffic and the creaking of an old car that had seen better days. Much like me. The battery indicator on my phone blinked red. 5% left. Figures, I muttered. I set the phone on the passenger seat and folded my hands in my lap, trying to gather what little strength I had left. And that's when it buzzed. A vibration so sharp in the silence that it made me flinch, followed by an unfamiliar number lighting up the screen. The phone buzzed again, louder this time, as if urging me not to ignore it. For a moment, I hesitated. When you're down to your last bit of battery, you think twice before answering anything. But something in me, maybe instinct, maybe desperation, pushed my hand forward. I picked it up. Unknown caller. My thumb hovered over the screen, and for a second, I considered letting it ring out. Nobody calls a man like me at dawn unless it's bad news. But the truth was, I didn't have much left to lose. I answered. Mr. Elias Thorne? The voice was crisp, formal, and carried the calm confidence of someone who rarely hears the word no. Yes, I rasped, surprised at how worn out I sounded. My name is Arthur, the voice continued. I serve as the personal butler for the Vanderbilt Hayes residence. My employer has instructed me to contact you. He requests your presence immediately. I blinked, unsure whether exhaustion was making me mishear things. Request me? Why? A short pause. Not hesitant, just measured. He will explain himself when you arrive. A vehicle is already en route to your location. It will reach you shortly. Please remain where you are. I sat up straighter, pulse picking up speed. A request from a household like that? For a man who had slept in his car? Before I could ask anything else, the call ended. My nearly dead phone went dark. I barely had time to process the call before I heard the low rumble of an engine approaching. Through the rain-specked windshield, I saw a black sedan glide down the street like it belonged to another world. The kind of car that made my old rusted sedan look like a toy. The vehicle stopped in front of me. The door opened smoothly, and a man in a dark suit stepped out. No hesitation. No judgment. He simply gestured toward the back seat. Sir, please, he said politely. It wasn't a question, it was a command wrapped in courtesy. I hesitated. My pride whispered at me to refuse, to keep walking. But curiosity won. Desperation helped too. I slid into the back, letting the door click shut behind me. The interior was quiet, luxurious. Leather seats cradled me like I had never known comfort. The air smelled faintly of cedar and polish, not the harsh cold of the streets I had spent the night on. The car moved smoothly, almost silently. I pressed my hands against the seat, still not believing this was happening. A car, a ride, an invitation, all for me? And yet, deep down, I knew one thing. Whatever awaited me at the other end of this ride would change everything. I kept my hands folded in my lap, staring out at the streets of Chicago as the city blurred past. The luxury around me didn't feel real. Not after the night I'd just endured. Not after Julian had closed his door in my face. Questions raced through my mind faster than the car could drive. Who was this Vanderbilt man? And how on earth had someone so wealthy even heard of a broken-down old architect sleeping in his car? The city's skyline stretched past the windows, buildings I had once helped design now towering silently as if judging me. A strange mix of pride and disbelief swelled inside me. Arthur, the driver, didn't speak. There was no small talk. No explanations. Just a steady rhythm of control, a quiet assurance that we were heading somewhere important. I realized how long it had been since I felt like anyone truly wanted me somewhere. This was different. Urgent. Necessary. And then I understood, with a shiver of both fear and anticipation, this ride wasn't just about a meeting. It was the hinge between the life I had lost and the opportunity that could change everything. Whatever awaited me at the Vanderbilt Hayes estate, I knew it wouldn't be ordinary. It wouldn't be easy. And it certainly wouldn't leave me the same. The gates appeared suddenly, wrought iron and impossibly tall, as if guarding a fortress from another era. Arthur guided me through them without a word, and I felt the weight of the world outside lift slightly with each step. Inside, the estate was vast beyond imagination. Hallways stretched endlessly, lined with rich wood panels and portraits that must have cost more than most homes I had ever seen. Marble floors reflected the soft light from crystal sconces, each step echoing with authority. I felt both small and oddly significant at the same time, an intruder and a guest all at once. Arthur led me to a massive library. It smelled of aged paper, polished wood, and faint tobacco. And there, propped up in a grand bed, was Silas Vanderbilt. The man was frail, wrapped in fine silk sheets, but his eyes, they were sharp, piercing, and alive. He studied me as if weighing every detail of the 32 years since we last met. A faint smile touched his lips. "Elias," he said, his voice soft but firm, "you look like a man who has been to hell and back. So, we have much to discuss." And in that moment, I understood. This meeting wasn't a courtesy. It was a reckoning. A chance to tip the scales of fortune, and maybe to finally face those who had wronged me. The estate seemed to stretch endlessly, a kingdom carved from ambition and wealth. Every hallway led to another marvel. Towering bookshelves, floors of polished marble, ceilings so high I could barely see the ornate moldings. Each portrait lining the walls told a story of power, influence, and legacy. I had stepped into a world that felt untouchable, a place where money and control weren't just tools, they were lifeblood. Arthur guided me silently, his presence both reassuring and imposing. Every step echoed, a subtle reminder that I was a visitor in a house that did not tolerate weakness. I held myself straighter, reminded of who I was, and yet aware of how far I had fallen in recent days. At the heart of the estate I saw him. Silas Vanderbilt, frail but commanding. His eyes, sharp and clear, measured every inch of me, cataloging my strengths, my exhaustion, my past. Despite his weakened body, the air around him radiated authority. I could feel that even the walls of this estate bowed to his presence. "Elias," he said, voice calm but loaded with meaning. "You've faced a storm these past days, yet here you are. That in itself tells me much." I sat, suddenly aware that this wasn't just a meeting, it was an evaluation. Every choice I had made, every sacrifice, every humiliation, it all had led to this room, this moment. And I realized, whatever happened next could redefine not only my future but the future of those who had doubted me. Silas' gaze held mine, unwavering, as if he could read the years etched into my face. 32 years ago, he had been a young developer on the brink of disaster. I had been the architect who could have watched him fail, taken the contract for myself, and walked away richer. But I hadn't. I stayed up for 3 nights straight, recalculated every line, every structure, and handed him a solution that saved his project, his reputation, his life. I didn't ask for a thing. Only a quiet hope that he would remember integrity mattered more than profit. "Do you recall Elias?" Silas' voice broke my reverie. "I've never forgotten what you did for me all those years ago. You chose loyalty over gain, action over selfishness." I nodded, the memory rushing back sharply. It felt like yesterday, yet here we were, me, broken by life's recent blows, and him, still sharp, still in control. His eyes softened slightly, but only for a moment. Then they hardened, as if reminding me that mercy and opportunity were not one and the same. "You've faced betrayal," he said. "Your son abandoned you in a time of need. But that test, that failure of character, does not go unnoticed. I listened, aware that every word carried weight. This wasn't just reflection, it was judgment. And somewhere deep inside, I felt the stirring of possibility. A chance to correct what had been ignored, to reclaim control over a city I had once helped shape, and to hold accountable those who had treated me as invisible. I took a deep breath. Whatever came next would require clarity, patience, and resolve. And I felt ready. Silas leaned back slightly, his fingers tracing the edge of a polished wooden desk beside the bed. "I have no heirs," he said, his voice steady, almost ceremonial. "My nephews are vultures, waiting for me to pass so they can strip the estate piece by piece. That will not happen." I listened, my pulse quickening, sensing the gravity of his words. "I have decided," he continued, "that my legacy will live on through a charitable foundation. It will manage all holdings, over 400 properties, including the building where your firm once stood. But a foundation needs leadership. Someone with backbone. Someone who has known loss, who understands the value of responsibility and integrity." His eyes locked on mine. "You, Elias, will be the chairman. A salary sufficient to live without worry. A housing allowance worthy of your station. And control over every tenant, every lease, every asset in my portfolio." I felt my stomach tighten. Control. Authority. Revenge disguised as justice. The irony was exquisite. Julian, the son who had rejected me, would unknowingly fall under my oversight. "Your son has failed a test of character," Silas said, almost whispering. "Now it is time for you to show what true leadership looks like. This is more than business, Elias. This is the measure of who you are after all you have endured." I exhaled slowly, letting the weight settle. The city, the estate, the very life I thought was lost, it was all within reach. And suddenly, the humiliation, the rejection, the night spent in a car, felt like fuel. I understood, clearly for the first time, that the game had changed. And I held the power. I sat back in the chair, absorbing the enormity of what had just been entrusted to me. Control over the properties, the leases, the tenants. All of it, now under my direction. For a moment, I allowed myself a quiet smile. Not a smile of triumph, yet, but a recognition that life had offered a second chance. One I hadn't expected, after everything I had endured. Everything Julian had done. Silas' voice cut through my thoughts, calm but firm. "Remember, Elias, power without judgment is nothing. The city can be unforgiving and people will test the limits of your patience. But you, who have felt the sting of betrayal and abandonment, will know how to act." I nodded slowly, letting his words sink in. I had spent the night shivering in a car, wondering where I had gone wrong. Now I had a city at my fingertips. A chance to restore balance, not just for myself, but for those who deserved fairness, justice, and recognition. Arthur, ever silent, handed me a tablet with reports, lists, and notices that seemed to pulse with potential. I glanced at the names, the properties, the overdue accounts, and there it was, the first sign that Julian and Bianca's perfect world had cracks I could finally expose. A shiver ran down my spine, not from fear, but from anticipation. This was the turning point. The moment when humiliation could transform into strategy. When power could be wielded with purpose. And I realized, for the first time since being locked out of my son's house, that the night in the rain had led me here. To the edge of something remarkable. I stared at the tablet in my hands, the numbers and names blurring at first, until they snapped into focus. Every property Silas had controlled, every lease agreement, every overdue account, it was all mine to oversee. The scale of it made my chest tighten. This wasn't just recovery, it was transformation. Arthur stood silently, waiting for instructions, as if he knew the gravity of my understanding. I traced the names across the screen, and one leapt out at me, Julian Thorne. And beside him, Bianca Thorne. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 32 years, I had poured every ounce of myself into ensuring my family's success. And for 32 hours, they had shown me that loyalty and love could be conditional. Now, the power dynamic had shifted in ways they could never have imagined. I leaned back, letting the weight settle. Not the crushing weight of failure, but the invigorating weight of opportunity. I realized that my son had not just failed me as a father. He had failed the test of character that Silas had mentioned. And I, the man who had spent the night in a cold car, was now in a position to correct that failure. The shift was complete. From humiliation to authority, from rejection to empowerment, in the span of a single day. I felt a spark, sharp and bright. Justice was within reach. And it would be deliberate, precise, and unforgettable. I scrolled further through the tablet, noting details I hadn't realized at first glance. Late payments, missed deadlines, tenants struggling to maintain appearances. The list was long, but one thing became immediately clear. Julian and Bianca were not the only ones living on borrowed time. Yet, theirs was the most personal. I allowed myself a quiet exhale, letting the realization sink in. For the first time in days, I felt control. Power, not just over finances, but over consequences. I could watch, guide, and, if necessary, enforce accountability. Justice would not be accidental. It would be intentional. Arthur handed me a folder containing detailed records of the properties, tenants, and corporate obligations. As I flipped through it, I felt a chill, not from cold, but from the magnitude of possibility. The same son who had closed a door in my face now unknowingly depended on a system I could manipulate. A subtle smile crept across my face. I remembered Silas' words, "Power without judgment is nothing, but you, Elias, will know how to act." I understood now. This wasn't revenge for spite. It was a lesson in responsibility, humility, and character. A way to show my son exactly what it meant to disregard the man who had given him everything. The storm of humiliation, the nights in the car, the loneliness, they had all led to this moment. And I knew deep down, the city and my family would never see it coming. I opened the delinquency reports and scrolled methodically through the list of overdue accounts. Numbers, dates, and names appeared, each a small story of mismanagement or negligence. But then my eyes landed on the ones that mattered most: Julian Thorne and Bianca Thorne. Their account was overdue by 90 days. Luxury and status had blinded them to reality. They were living on borrowed stability. I leaned back in the chair, fingers steepled, eyes narrowing. For all their sophistication, they had overlooked the one person who had the power to enforce consequences: me. I had spent the night in a car, freezing, hungry, and humiliated. Now, I held the authority to make them feel a fraction of that uncertainty. Arthur watched silently as he had all day, waiting for guidance. I traced the numbers again, noting the balloon payments, the extensions requested, and the urgent correspondence that had piled up in their absence. Every detail whispered an opportunity. The lesson my son and his wife needed could be delivered with precision. A spark of determination lit in my chest. This wasn't cruelty. It wasn't vengeance for its own sake. It was correction. A way to remind them that respect and responsibility weren't optional, even for those who considered themselves untouchable. I set the tablet down and exhaled slowly, feeling the shift inside me. The man who had slept in a rusted sedan, rejected by his own family, was gone. The man who now commanded the tools to teach accountability was awake, focused, and ready to act. I rose from the chair and walked toward the wide window overlooking the garden. Quiet, still, untouched by the storms that had torn through my life. As I stood there, I mapped out the next steps in my mind. Not out of haste, but clarity. For the first time in a long while, I felt steady. I replayed Julian's voice in my head, the cold tone, the dismissal, the door closing. That moment had tried to break me. Now it was fuel. I returned to the desk and pulled the reports closer. There was no need for aggression or loud gestures. Subtle pressure would be more effective. A simple adjustment to the priorities list. A review of outstanding obligations. A note to the property management division about strict enforcement of overdue accounts. Nothing dramatic. But every step would tighten the net around my son and his wife until they finally realized how fragile their world truly was. This wasn't about stripping them of everything. It was about guiding them toward a truth they had long ignored. Comfort without gratitude breeds arrogance. And arrogance without accountability produces disaster. Arthur stood by, waiting for directions. I nodded slightly, signaling the start of the first administrative shifts. A quiet beginning. A controlled beginning. A beginning that would soon land directly on Julian's doorstep with a force he could never anticipate. My heart was calm. My mind was sharp. The lesson was taking shape, delivered not with chaos, but precision. I leaned back in the chair, absorbing the weight of what I had just set in motion. 32 years of work, dedication, and sacrifice had led me here, not as a defeated man, but as someone with authority and vision. The irony wasn't lost on me. Julian and Bianca, who had dismissed me, treated me as invisible, were now unknowingly dependent on a system I controlled. Every decision, every notice, every enforcement of policy would flow through me. I had gone from powerless and humiliated to indispensable and commanding. I allowed a small, controlled smile to form. Not gloating, just a recognition of the reversal. The tools of justice, carefully positioned, were ready. And this time, no one would be spared from the consequences of their choices. Arthur handed me the last folder, the one marked, immediate attention, high priority accounts. I opened it, and my eyes settled again on Julian and Bianca's names. The moment of reckoning was closer than I had imagined. And soon, they would see that neglect and arrogance have a price, even in the world they thought untouchable. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. This wasn't just about reclaiming what I had lost. It was about demonstrating the values that mattered most: integrity, accountability, and respect. Julian had failed. Bianca had failed. And I, Elias Thorne, had been given the power to ensure they would understand it fully. The storm outside had passed, but the real test was about to begin. And nothing, not even my own son, would see it coming. I sat in the office, the city skyline stretching before me, a reminder of the life I had built and the one I was about to influence. Arthur placed the delinquency reports in front of me, and I studied them with the patience of a man who had learned the cost of impulsive decisions. Julian Thorne, Bianca Thorne. Their accounts were overdue, balloon payments looming, and requests for extensions already piling up. The first misstep, already documented, was ripe for enforcement. Every luxurious purchase, every delayed payment, every assumed privilege was a thread waiting to be pulled. I tapped my finger against the tablet, imagining the domino effect of well-timed actions. Not cruelty. Not revenge for pride alone. Correction. Accountability. A lesson in humility delivered through structure. This wasn't just a list of debts, it was a roadmap. A guide to showing Julian and Bianca what it meant to treat others as dispensable. And for me, it was a way to reclaim dignity, to turn the humiliation of the past days into precise, deliberate action. Arthur watched silently, aware that no step would be taken lightly. The stage was set, the tools ready. All that remained was to decide where to apply the first pressure point, and the timing that would ensure maximum impact. I exhaled, steadying myself. The game was no longer about survival. It was about authority, strategy, and subtle justice. As I continued reviewing the documents, a pattern emerged with startling clarity. Julian and Bianca weren't just behind. They were relying on the assumption that consequences would never reach them. Their history of delays showed confidence bordering on entitlement. They believed the world owed them grace without responsibility. I leaned back in the chair, letting the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders. My son, the same boy who once stayed up late helping me reorganize shelves in my old workshop, now gambling with obligations as if life guaranteed resets. The contrast stung, but it also strengthened my resolve. I studied the projected dates, missed rent, missed maintenance fees, unauthorized renovations, and a request submitted just hours earlier for yet another extension. They expected a yes. They assumed it. That assumption would be the hinge on which the lesson turned. Timing was everything. Apply pressure too early, and they'd dismiss it. Apply it too late, and they'd find a way to slip through the cracks. I needed to strike right at the moment when their confidence was highest, when they felt untouchable. That's when the truth lands with the most clarity. Arthur glanced at me. "You've already decided, sir," he said quietly. He wasn't wrong. The plan wasn't fully formed yet, but the direction was clear. They had built a throne on borrowed sand. I intended to let the tide come in. I shifted to the next binder, a thicker one outlining all current tenants, properties, contracts, and flagged accounts. Julian and Bianca's file was small compared to others, but theirs demanded the most attention, not because of the numbers, but because of the story attached to it. Their home sat in a district where punctuality wasn't optional. Luxury came with strict rules, and every late payment sent alerts up the chain. They'd ignored all of them. I traced my thumb along the margin where one note stood out. Final grace period expires in 14 days. 14 days. Just enough time to prepare the pieces without rushing the process. I outlined 3 steps on a notepad. 1. Deny all extension requests. If they had no safety net, reality would strike faster. 2. Reassess all outstanding violations. Every unchecked action had consequences. They needed to see them clearly. 3. Notify the board of a formal review. This wasn't about theatrics. It was about structure, procedures, accountability. Arthur watched as I wrote, recognizing the shift from contemplation to execution. "This path won't be easy," he murmured. "I know," I replied, "but avoiding hard decisions is what led us here." This wasn't an act of fury. It was a reminder that responsibility doesn't vanish simply because someone decides it should. Julian and Bianca had lived in comfort for too long without understanding the system that supported it. Now the system would speak. Once the steps were written out, I closed the binder and let my hand rest on the cover. Planning was one thing. Acting on it required a different level of resolve, one forged through years of sacrifice, mistakes, and the quiet hope that your children will grow into better versions of themselves. I stood and walked toward the large window overlooking the district. The roads below moved with a rhythm that reminded me of a lesson my father taught me long ago. People show their true nature when comfort fades. Julian and Bianca had been protected by comfort for too long. They'd mistaken ease for immunity. Not anymore. I called Arthur over. "Prepare the notices," I said. "No extensions, no exceptions." He nodded, not with eagerness, but with understanding. He knew this wasn't spite. It was clarity, clarity born from nights spent in my truck, rain pounding the roof while my own son refused to let me through his door. That memory wasn't just painful, it was motivating. I allowed myself a deep breath. The kind you take when you know you're about to shift the ground under someone's feet, not to destroy them, but to help them stand straighter. The first stone was set. Soon they would feel the shift. Now it was time to move from planning to action. The office was quiet, almost reverent, as I reviewed the first set of notices. Julian and Bianca's requests for extensions were stacked neatly, waiting for a signature that would never come. Arthur stood at my side, ready to deliver the orders as soon as I gave them. I paused, remembering the cold, wet night in my car. The embarrassment, the loneliness. That memory sharpened my focus. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about accountability. I tapped the screen, approving the first wave of denials. The system would now operate on its own momentum. Every overdue account, every ignored alert, every missed deadline, they would all hit them simultaneously. "This will reach them tonight," I said, my voice calm but firm. Arthur nodded, handing me a digital confirmation. "The notices will be delivered personally." "Timing is precise, sir." I allowed a small, controlled smile to form. Julian and Bianca had built their comfort on assumptions. Assumptions that I would never intervene, that the consequences would remain abstract. Now, those assumptions would crumble. From the corner of the office, I observed the city lights flicker against the dark sky. The contrast between my previous helplessness and the authority I now wielded was stark. No chaos, no shouting, just structure. And it would speak louder than words ever could. The first step was set in motion. I felt the calm satisfaction of knowing the initial move was inevitable and unavoidable. Julian and Bianca would soon feel the weight of their choices, and they wouldn't see it coming. I parked the black SUV a few streets away from their neighborhood, letting the headlights fade into the night. The house loomed ahead, glittering with wealth. Porsches lined the driveway, and the glow from the floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated a scene of opulence and careless indulgence. Inside, Julian and Bianca laughed, their voices carrying easily over the soft hum of the city. For a moment, I let myself watch, quietly noting every detail. The chandelier swinging slightly above the dining table. The waitstaff moving with choreographed precision. The careless gestures that betrayed their sense of invincibility. This was the life that had dismissed me, the father who had spent the night in a rusted sedan, cold and hungry. Now I held the levers of accountability. I tapped the tablet in my hand. The first notices were being delivered. Every denial, every overdue notice, every pending consequence would reach them tonight. The luxury and comfort they relied on so heavily would soon clash with reality. Arthur, ever silent, leaned in. "They have no idea what's coming, sir," he whispered. "No," I replied. "They think comfort shields them. They think the man they rejected has no influence. They are about to learn otherwise." I exhaled slowly, letting the anticipation build. The first stones had been placed, and the wave of consequences was beginning to roll forward. It wasn't just a test of finances, it was a test of character. And they were about to fail it spectacularly. The gala was in full swing when the courier arrived. Silver trays glided past guests, laughter and clinking glasses filling the grand hall. Julian stood at the center, smiling confidently, oblivious to the envelope that would soon shift everything. Arthur had instructed the courier to hand the notice directly to him. No intermediaries, no delays. The timing was deliberate. I watched from a distance, hidden in the shadows, as the envelope changed hands. Julian's fingers brushed the crisp red notice, and for the first time that night, his confident expression faltered. He opened it slowly, the words inside a hammer striking against the foundation of his carefully constructed world. The color drained from his face. A whisper of disbelief escaped his lips as he realized the contents. Immediate eviction. No exceptions. Final notice. The murmurs of the party seemed to fade, the room narrowing down to his shock and the envelope clutched in his trembling hands. Bianca leaned over, confusion and panic spreading across her features. Guests began to notice the tension, eyes darting between Julian, Bianca, and the crimson envelope. Julian's attempts to make excuses faltered under the weight of reality. I allowed myself a controlled nod. The first move had landed exactly where I intended. Not chaos, not malice, but undeniable, unavoidable consequence. The lesson had begun, and Julian and Bianca had no idea that the source of this reckoning was sitting unseen, orchestrating each step, quietly watching the first domino fall. As the party continued around them, Julian and Bianca's composure crumbled. Their carefully constructed world was cracking in real time, and the realization sank in that no one, not their friends, not their social circle, could shield them from what had arrived. I remained in the SUV, observing every expression, every frantic glance. Arthur stood by silently, confirming that the notices had been received and recorded. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Julian's attempts to dial a number were frantic, yet ultimately futile. No calls could reverse the reality now in his hands. No plea could erase the fact that the authority he had dismissed, the very father he had locked out, was quietly controlling the outcome. I felt a cold, steady clarity. This wasn't about public humiliation. It wasn't about revenge for pride's sake. It was accountability, structured and inevitable. They had ignored rules, deadlines, and the consequences that had always existed, hidden only by their assumptions. The first stone had fallen, and it had landed perfectly. I closed the tablet and let my thoughts drift briefly to the next steps. The eviction notice was just the opening move. Soon, Julian and Bianca would understand that comfort and status are meaningless without responsibility and respect. I exhaled slowly, the calm before the storm. The stage was set. The players were in position. And the real reckoning, the confrontation that would teach lessons not just in finance, but in character, was about to begin. The boardroom on the 62nd floor was quiet, almost unnervingly so. Leather chairs lined the room, the table polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the city lights far below. I sat with my back to the door, observing the skyline I had helped shape, the hum of the city faint but constant beneath the floor. Minutes later, the heavy double doors creaked open. Julian and Bianca stepped inside, their heels clicking against the marble floor, faces a mixture of anxiety and indignation. They did not see me immediately, and I allowed that moment to stretch, letting them feel the invisible weight of anticipation. Julian's voice trembled slightly. "Mr. Chairman?" The words sounded awkward, foreign, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. Bianca's eyes scanned the room nervously, her posture tense, hands fidgeting with her clutch. They had no idea who sat across the table, nor did they suspect that the authority they had dismissed so casually was now embodied in the man they had called Dad. I allowed the silence to linger, letting it press against them, as if the room itself were reminding them of past missteps. This was the calm before the storm. Their world was about to collide with reality in ways they could never have imagined. And when I finally spoke, the weight of recognition would settle in their bones. The reckoning, long overdue, was about to begin. I finally turned in my chair, letting my gaze meet Julian and Bianca's. The air shifted instantly, a silent pulse of disbelief rippling through the room. "Dad!" Julian's voice barely carried, a mix of shock and fear. His confidence, once so impenetrable, crumbled instantly. The man they had dismissed, the one they had locked out into the rain, now sat as the ultimate authority in the very seat of power they had never imagined. Bianca's hand flew to her mouth, eyes widening as she realized the truth. Every assumption they had relied on, the idea that my influence was gone, that consequences would never reach them, was shattered in a single, quiet moment. I let the room settle in that silence, letting the tension grow. "This chair," I said calmly, gesturing to the mahogany seat, "isn't just a piece of furniture. It represents authority, responsibility, and the ability to enforce accountability. And it is mine, because I have earned it even when the people closest to me refuse to see the value of integrity." Julian opened his mouth to protest, to excuse, but no words formed. His arrogance and entitlement collided with the stark reality of his position. He was a tenant, late on every commitment, standing before the very father he had humiliated. I leaned forward, voice low but resolute. "This is the consequence of ignoring the system, of disregarding the people who built the foundation beneath your comfort. You failed the test of character, Julian, and now you will see what responsibility truly demands." Julian swallowed hard, shifting in his chair as the reality of his situation sank in. Bianca's composure wavered, and the murmurs of the boardroom staff, though quiet, seemed to echo in the tension-filled space. I opened the folder in front of me, sliding it across the polished table toward them. Inside were the reports, notices, and records of every overdue payment, missed deadline, and unfulfilled obligation. The weight of accountability rested in their hands, though the responsibility was no longer theirs to escape. "You see this?" I said, voice steady, each word deliberate. "Every request for extension, every ignored notice, every delay in responsibility, it has consequences. You thought you could ignore them, dismissing me, dismissing the system, dismissing the principle that actions or inactions always lead to outcomes." Julian's hands trembled as he reached toward the papers, but I let him pause, letting the gravity of their choices sink in fully. "This is not chaos. It is order. It is accountability. And it is precisely what you ignored when you treated me, your father, as if I were invisible." Bianca whispered something, a desperate excuse, but it was drowned by the clarity of the lesson. This wasn't about malice. It was about showing the cost of entitlement, the price of arrogance, and the undeniable authority of someone who had been wronged and now held the power to correct it. For the first time that evening, Julian's eyes reflected understanding and fear. The structured lesson had begun. I reached into the folder and pulled out a single, crisp envelope, its red color sharp against the polished table. Julian's eyes followed it, confusion and dread battling his composure. "This," I said, placing the envelope in front of him, "is the result of ignoring responsibility. It's the culmination of entitlement, arrogance, and a refusal to respect the very people and systems that uphold your world." He hesitated, hand hovering above it, as if touching it might undo the consequences within. But reality does not bend to hesitation. Bianca leaned in, voice quivering. "Please, we didn't know." I cut her off gently but firmly. "This is not about ignorance. It is about accountability. Every overdue notice, every denied extension, every skipped obligation. This envelope represents the tangible results of those choices. It is immediate. It is final. And it is now." Julian opened it, scanning the contents, his face paling with each line. The eviction notice stared back at him, immediate vacate. No exceptions. 24 hours to comply. The room fell silent, the hum of the city below fading into insignificance compared to the weight of consequence that now filled the boardroom. I watched, calm, measured, as the realization hit them fully. They had been blind to the structures that supported their life, blind to the man they had dismissed, and blind to the truth that every privilege carries a price. And now, they would experience that price firsthand. Julian sank into the chair, shoulders slumping, a mixture of shame, fear, and disbelief etched across his face. Bianca's attempt at composure crumbled entirely, tears spilling freely as she realized the full scope of what had unfolded. I leaned back slightly, letting the weight of my presence speak as loudly as my words ever could. "This isn't personal vengeance," I said calmly, voice steady, resonating with authority. "This is consequence. This is accountability. And it is exactly what you ignored when you treated me, your father, as if I were invisible, as if responsibility were optional, as if your comfort mattered more than basic respect." The realization hit them fully, the same way it had hit me the night I sat in my car, soaked in rain, rejected by my own son. The roles had reversed, but the lesson remained the same. Character matters more than wealth, humility matters more than status, and accountability is inevitable. I watched as Julian attempted to form words, his arrogance stripped away, replaced with the raw understanding that every action has consequences, and no privilege could shield him from this reality. Bianca clutched his arm, the weight of their choices sinking in. I allowed them a moment to absorb the lesson fully, the silence thick but purposeful. Finally, I spoke quietly, but with finality. "Now you understand. Not every system can be manipulated, and not every person can be ignored. This is your moment of reckoning. Learn from it, or continue to suffer the consequences." The confrontation was over. The lesson had been delivered. And justice, tempered by authority, not malice, had been served. Teach and the bonds of family are fragile when respect and responsibility are absent. I glanced out the window at the city I had helped shape, feeling the weight of years past and the promise of years ahead. Every decision, every moment of preparation, had led to this balance, justice tempered by compassion. The boardroom emptied slowly, Julian and Bianca escorted out under the watchful eyes of security. Their designer bags and carefully curated possessions were packed into waiting vehicles, leaving only the echo of accountability in their wake. I remained seated for a few moments, letting the silence settle over the polished table. It was not satisfaction I felt. There was no joy in watching someone suffer, but clarity. Justice had been administered, structured, and fair. The lesson had been delivered with precision, not cruelty. My thoughts drifted to the grandchildren, innocent and unaware of the tensions that had boiled over in the world of adults. They would be cared for, shielded from the mistakes of their parents, and given opportunities their parents had taken for granted. The lesson for them, and for Julian and Bianca, was clear. Privilege without accountability is hollow. Power without integrity is empty. This was more than a story of eviction or authority. It was a story of life lessons. Lessons I hoped would ripple beyond the walls of this boardroom, reaching anyone willing to see the value of integrity, humility, and responsibility. I walked slowly through the office, hands behind my back, mind turning over the events of the past hours. Julian and Bianca's arrogance had been obvious for years, hidden behind charm and social polish. Their world had been built on appearances, on borrowed security, and on the assumption that consequences could be avoided. Contrast that with the lives of the tenants, the employees, and the countless families who relied on structure and integrity every day. Those who acted responsibly, even in small ways, found stability. Those who acted selfishly, even briefly, eventually faced the reckoning. I thought again of my grandchildren and the trust funds I had quietly established for their education, not as a gift for entitlement, but as a safety net built on foresight and love. They would not inherit arrogance. They would inherit opportunity and guidance. Life, I realized, rewards consistency, humility, and respect. It punishes neglect, selfishness, and disregard for others. It is impartial, unyielding, and fair, if one is willing to recognize the rules and act accordingly. The lesson extended beyond my family. It was a reminder to anyone watching: your choices, your ethics, and the way you treat others define the world you will live in. Privilege may cushion, but it cannot shield the characterless. And for those who would watch and still hesitate to act when wronged, remember this: life does not wait for hesitation. It moves, consequences arrive, and those who prepare and act with integrity stand strong. Julian's mistake was not financial, it was moral. He had forgotten that respect and responsibility matter more than status or appearances. And Bianca, swept up in vanity and pretense, had ignored the human lessons that no amount of luxury could replace. I knew then that life's true victories are not about wealth, nor influence, nor power. They are about standing firm when everything seems lost. They are about correcting wrongs, protecting the innocent, and ensuring that lessons are learned without bitterness, but with unwavering resolve. And so, to anyone watching, remember: the storms you face, the betrayals you endure, the hardships you survive, they are not the end. They are the moment when your strength, patience, and integrity are tested. How you respond defines the life you lead and the legacy you leave behind. Before we close this chapter, consider this: if you want to witness more stories where justice and resilience prevail, subscribe now. And if you choose not to, leave a comment. Tell me why you would let injustice go unchecked in a world that demands courage and accountability. The night air felt lighter now, as if the weight of the past hours had finally lifted. I looked across the city that had witnessed both my rise and my fall, and I understood something essential: every setback holds the seed of opportunity, every rejection can be transformed into clarity, and every injustice can be met with resolve. This story, my journey through despair, betrayal, and triumph, is not just about me. It is about anyone who has faced rejection from those they trusted most, anyone who has felt abandoned when they gave everything, anyone who has been left out in the rain while the world moved on. I speak to you now: the lessons in these stories matter. They teach accountability, integrity, and the real meaning of strength. If you want to continue learning from stories where justice prevails and wisdom is earned, subscribe now. Don't risk missing the guidance that could change the way you respond when life tests you. And for those still hesitating, leave a comment. Tell me why you would let someone endure suffering when action could prevent it. Your response will remind us all that choices define character, and inaction has consequences. The higher you climb, the thinner the air and the greater the fall. But from that fall, you can rise stronger than ever. And this is only one of the lessons I've learned. Wait until you hear the next. The next story will challenge everything you thought you knew about justice, family, and resilience. And when it comes, you'll want to be ready.